Hi, Deborah.
Hello. All right. Tonight's class may be a little bit shorter than usual. I was a little distracted over the weekend when I was preparing because I've been having COVID and I've been isolating. So hopefully I prepared well anyway, but I think the text I prepared is a little shorter than normal. Okay.
Feel better soon.
Thank you. I'm already feeling mostly better. I'm just still stuck imprisoned in my guest room.
My daughter has it also.
I hope she also feels better.
And her boyfriend.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot going around at the moment. Okay, so this is part 12 of our series on the 8th chapter of Bava Kam. And we are going to be on pages 87a and 87b this evening, beginning with the Mishnah, which parts of this Mishnah have appeared earlier in the Gemara. Parts of it we have not seen before. Matnitin, here's the Mishnah. This is more stringent about a person than about an ox, meaning a person who injures another person is going to pay more money than an ox who injures a person or another ox, but we're talking here about an ox that injures a person. Obviously, oxen themselves don't pay money, but we're talking about their owners who pay their bills for them. Okay. She'adam shalem nezek tsar ripui shevet uboshet umishalem dmei vladot. Because people who injure other people pay the 5 payments that we've been talking about all along. Nezek, tsar, ripui, shevet, and boshet. And they also pay a fine for causing a miscarriage by hitting a pregnant woman. As opposed to a shore, an ox, the shore eino mishalem elenezek upatur midmei vladot. A shore only pays the real value of the damage, the nezek, and does not pay for miscarriages.
Question.
Yes.
Is there any difference between an ox who is notorious for doing things and one who is not? And which are we talking about, if so?
Okay, so here we are talking about a shor muad. That's an ox whose owner has been warned because the ox has been aggressive in a criminal way in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And the owner is supposed to be either locking the ox up or eating the ox for dinner, but whatever it takes to keep it from attacking another person. That, under those circumstances, the owner of the ox pays full nezek, but still doesn't pay the other 4 payments.
Okay.
An ox that has never been aggressive or violent before is only going to pay half of nezek. The first time. Yeah, actually the first 2 times. Then once the animal's been violent twice, then you warn the owner, and the owner now pays full damages. Or if they have any sense at all, they get rid of the animal. Okay. But the thing is that you couldn't just say people can't have dangerous animals. I mean, you could say it about other dangerous animals, but you can't say it about cattle, because oxen are the main engine for moving farm machinery and stuff like that, moving wagons. And in the same way as we accept a certain amount of property damage, and for that matter, death, from automobiles and trucks, because they're what makes our society continue to function in the way we want it to function. So this is the same kind of phenomenon where if you want to be able to farm and you want to be able to move your stuff from one place to another, you need to own cattle. Cattle need to eat and they need to be able to drink. So they have to be able to walk down to the river and walk around in a pasture. So they have to have some freedom of movement. And that means that they're going to, some certain amount of time, interact with other people without your supervision. And there's always going to be some danger that this big animal is going to be aggressive or poorly behaved or whatever. But society in general seems to need to take that risk in order to get the benefits of being able to use cattle. Okay. Okay. The next thing the Mishnah has to say seems not to be so closely related, but this is a piece that we've seen before. A person who hits their father or their mother and doesn't make a mark on them, which you might remember we saw Gemara 3 or 4 classes ago, give or take, where we concluded that we had some suggestions about what kind of injury you might give your parents that would not make a mark but would require you to pay all 5 payments. Somebody suggested that it meant that you deafened them, although there was a dispute about whether that really fit the description. I think we mostly concluded that it might refer to a case where you shaved your parents' head without their permission. Okay. And they had some sort of damage to the skin on their head, not caused by you, but uncovered by the shaving, that then made it impossible for them to go to work in their job as a dancer in a nightclub. Does any of that sound familiar? Okay, so this is the Mishnah we were talking about when we were having that conversation. Okay, so that the person who hits their parent and doesn't make a mark, or somebody who injures their fellow on Yom Kippur, you owe all 5 payments for either of those things, even though they are, in a sense, more wrong than your ordinary injuring a person. And so you might have thought that you would, because you've touched on something which almost but not quite gets you a death penalty, that you would not owe a financial penalty. Because as we'll see a little bit later in the Mishnah, we do have a principle that if you have put yourself in jeopardy of a death penalty by doing a crime, you cannot be made to pay a financial payment for that crime, even if we're not going to kill you, which is bizarre. And hopefully we'll get to discuss that in more detail, although not so much tonight. Okay. Somebody who injures a Hebrew slave, so that's an indentured servant who started out as an ordinary Jewish man, was sold into slavery to pay his debts, probably as a result of criminal activity on his part, and is now serving a period of time in which he has to, work off the wages he's already been paid. So that's the Eved Ivri. If somebody injures an Eved Ivri, he owes them all 5 payments, except if he's the owner, he doesn't owe them the shevet. Right? Chutz min shevet bizman shehu shelo, because because the person's work belongs to you already. You already paid for it, so you don't have to pay them for their inability to work for you. They would just then have to hand the money to you anyway, because you're the one who owns the work. Yes, John.
So if you injured someone on Rosh Hashanah instead of Yom Kippur, is it a different bunch of
I
rules?
believe that as long as it is not Shabbat, you still pay.
Okay.
I think Shabbat is the only day that injuring people is a death penalty offense.
But somehow Yom Kippur does not fall with Shabbat.
Right. Yom Kippur, you get karet instead of death.
Mhm.
For all of the malachot. Yeah, I'm going to say for all of them. Whereas Shabbat has a death penalty for most of them. So it's the same level of seriousness, but it doesn't interact in the same way with financial penalties. And Yom Tov, like Rosh Hashanah, may or may not have a prohibition on injuring people at all, depending on where that prohibition comes from. I believe that one of the theories is that the prohibition on injuring people is that it is a sort of minor form of killing, not killing people, but killing animals. And killing animals is allowed on Yom Tov for food. it may be that injuring people is not any more forbidden on Yom Tov than it is on weekdays. It is, of course, not okay to go around injuring people. Let me be very clear about that. But it doesn't mean that it has to be more forbidden on Rosh Hashanah than it is any other day. Whereas Shabbat and Yom Kippur, it is more forbidden.
Okay.
Okay. Chovel be'eved ivri. No, we did that already. Sorry. Chovel be'eved Knani. That's where we are. If you injure somebody else's Canaanite slave, a Canaanite slave is a real classical slavery situation where you have somebody who before they were enslaved was not Jewish. They are now enslaved such that your children will inherit them. You own their children. You can sell them. You can buy them. I would call it chattel slavery, except that in halacha, slaves are real estate, not chattel. So I find it hard to use that phrase in this context. But in any case, with all of the usual caveats about how slavery is evil, and I have no idea why it's permitted, but nonetheless, trying to understand the Gemara, if you injure somebody else's Canaanite slave, you owe all 5 payments, which we're going to presume in the lesson until somebody tells us otherwise. Those 5 payments are paid to the owner. We're not going to get to the Gemara on this part of the Mishnah tonight. Perhaps we'll get enlightened about that at some point. But for right now, it's what we're going to assume. In the same sense as the shevet for the Eved Ivri goes to his master because his master owns the right to have him work for him for free. So the fact that he can't work is actually a damage to the master rather than to the slave. The owner here owns the body of the slave, so whatever reduction in value that body suffers should belong to the owner, which is evil, but still apparently the law. Okay. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Ein lavadim boshet. Rabbi Yehuda takes the position that slaves are sort of permanently so demeaned by the way they exist that it's not possible to demean them further, and you don't have to pay boshet for them. Not that they don't have feelings, so much as that from a legal perspective, their feelings are already being hurt as badly as they can be. Okay. Interacting with a cheresh, a deaf person, a shota, a mentally incompetent person, or a katan, a child, is bad. And it will tell us why this interaction is bad. Because hachovel bahen chayav, if you injure them, you're obligated to pay. V'hem shechavlu ba'achirim p'turim, but if they injure somebody else, they're exempt. So in theory, if you get into a fist fight with one of these people, you could come out owing tens of thousands or potentially millions of dollars in damages because you damaged them. But no matter how badly they damage you, they're not going to owe you a penny. Right? So it is not a good idea to get into a fight with a person who has that legal status. And that is what interacting with them is bad means. Is don't get into a fight with them. Ha'eved v'ha'isha, slaves and women, piatan ra'ah, it's also bad to interact with women and slaves for a similar but not quite the same reason. Because ha'chovel behen chayav, if you injure them, you are obligated to pay. V'hem shechavlu ba'achirim p'turin, but if they injure somebody else, they are exempt. Aval mishalmim la'achar zman, but the woman and the slave will pay or may potentially pay later, because nitgarsha ha'isha, if the woman gets divorced and her assets become disentangled from her husband's, so that she has money that is entirely hers, or nishtachrer ha'eved, the slave gets freed, then chayavim l'shalem, they will become obligated to pay. It is that 2 cases are not exactly the same because slaves are kind of definitionally without assets. They're not capable of owning assets, whereas married women are capable of owning assets. Just the default deal that we assume they made with their husbands, unless we have information to the contrary, is that the assets all belong to their husbands for the duration of the marriage. But it is possible, and there are some cases in the Gemara of real couples that did this, to have effectively a prenuptial agreement in which your assets stay totally separate. You pay your own bills, and the woman's stuff is hers every bit as much while she's married as it was when she was single. In that case, it is not at all clear to me that this is true. She might very well owe damages immediately because she's financially not different married than she was single. But the Gemara, at least here, I have not yet seen a place where it addresses that. It may be that it's addressed, but I haven't seen it yet. As opposed to the slave who is metaphysically incapable of possessing things, which is different than the woman. Okay.
So a question.
Mhm.
If I tell my slave to injure someone else, presumably I am liable, but the slave is not?
Well, for almost all crimes, the person who actually commits the crime is liable, not the person who sends them to commit it. There are a couple of exceptions, but as far as I know, this is not one of them.
I was asking because it said
But there
that-
has
that
to
the-
be some sort of, yeah, there has to be some sort of disincentive, because otherwise that would be a wise but evil thing to do. I'm not sure. Let me find out the answer to that.
Okay. I was asking because it spoke about the slave injuring someone else, that they are exempt. And
Yeah,
so that was
and-
a follow-up question to that.
yeah, it seems like that would be a very dangerous out, that rich people could arrange to have their enemies injured and not pay anything if they have slaves. And yeah, that seems like a terrible idea. So let me find out what the answer is. Okay. And then weirdly, we get to the end of the father and mother case, which we had a bunch of other cases like stuck in the middle of the question of injuring your parents and injuring people on holidays. But we're coming back to that. So if somebody strikes their father or their mother and does make a mark on them, or somebody who injures their fellow on Shabbat, patur mikulan mipnei shehu nidon b'nafsho. They're exempt from all of the payments because they are judged for their life. Notice it doesn't say they're killed, right? Once you put yourself in a place where you're in jeopardy of a trial for a capital crime, that's enough. You already don't owe a financial penalty, even if you did it in such a way where you're certainly never going to be killed. Like, for example, you live in a time and place where we don't have the death penalty. Or for that matter, you did it in front of witnesses who are all your relatives, or all women, or all each other's relatives, or all children, right? Whatever. Even if we are never going to be able to put you to death because of a technicality, it is still the case that you are not going to pay a financial penalty for that. Which is, to say the least, odd. Okay, but that lets out the case of injuring somebody on Shabbat or injuring your parents in such a way that you make a mark, because those are, in principle, at least capital crimes. Okay. And somebody who injures their own Canaanite slave is exempt from all of the payments. Presumably because if they paid them, they'd only pay them to themselves anyway. There's not much point in undergoing a court case, so you can decide how much money to take out of your right pocket and put it back into your left pocket. This is interesting, though, because some kinds of injuries that you can cause your own slave result in the slave going free. I think we may already have touched on this once a number of classes ago. But if you do something which results in your slave losing an eye or a tooth, or I think a hand or a foot, the slave goes free automatically. So we must be talking about something short of that. Although, actually, then you still wouldn't pay the 5 payments. But it wouldn't, yeah, okay. Well,
Deborah,
hopefully
hold
when the
on.
Gemara gets to that, we'll figure it out. Yes.
Sorry, can you go back up? before you get to the
Yeah.
before you go on to the Gemara, in the case of Makeh Vivimo,
Mhm.
we said they don't have any financial. Someone who does is exempt from the financial payments. I mean,
Mhm.
doesn't it seem obvious, because you don't know at that point if they're going to be exonerated from a death penalty or not. So they're getting the most severe punishment. You can't, maybe there's an idea that you're not going to give someone two different kinds of punishments for the same crime.
That is true, but it is distinct from the sort of ideas of double jeopardy that we have in American law, in the sense that even if it is from the moment of the crime already impossible for there to be a successful capital prosecution, there is still never going to be a financial penalty.
Mhm.
Right. If I injure somebody on Shabbat as the example here, the example that I usually like to give is I set your dining room table on fire as fuel to bake my bread on Shabbos. All right, so baking bread on Shabbat is unquestionably one of the 39 malachot, and burning wood in order to bake bread is another one of the 39 malachot. I've definitely violated Shabbat on a Torah level twice over there. If I do it with only witnesses who are, let's say, not credible, but by a technicality, I'm definitely never going to be put to death, because we only use technically correct witnesses for a death penalty case. And I am
Right.
still not capable of being tried for a financial penalty there. I can just get off free.
Right, but the fact is that
It's a flaw in the system.
but the court doesn't know at the time you're committing the crime whether or not your witnesses are valid. They investigate it later. So at the time you could, nobody knows that you're not. Sorry.
Maybe it could be. I granting that that's possible, although we could say that if I've arranged to be surrounded by only women or by only non-Jews, then it may be that if we knew all the facts, we could know that. But you're right, the court may not know that until they do an investigation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So that's
In any
exactly,
case,
that's why I was thinking that there must be a good reason for it, and the most severe punishment is the mavet anyway.
that is certainly true. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So, Ba'amine Rabbi Elazar me Rav. So Rabbi Elazar asked a question of Rav. And we are going to spend the rest of the evening on this question. And we will still be dealing at least with a related question next week. Ba'amine Rabbi Elazar me Rav, hachovel bevat ktana shel acherim chavala lemi. So if you injure somebody else's minor daughter, who gets the money for the injury? Now, here's the thing. The normal principle is that minors, and in particular minor girls, all of their earnings go automatically to their father, unless their father is refusing to support them, in which case they get to keep their earnings and use those earnings to support themselves. But the default is that the father gets her earnings and he supports her, usually on the assumption that in fact she's gonna be taking a lot more of his money than he's taking of hers in that arrangement. Oh, that's not why. The reason why is going to turn out to be because the Torah says that a father is capable of marrying off his daughter, not making arrangements for her to get married, but actually getting married for her, and he does not need her consent. And if he is capable of effectively selling her, and one of my teachers about 30 years ago tried to insist to me that this is not selling, and I think that my strongest argument of my life, that if it walks like a duck, it talks like a duck, and is always seen in the company of ducks, it's a duck. This is a duck. He's able to sell her, and in particular, he's able to sell ownership over her earnings, because, as I said before, the default position is that a woman's assets and her earnings go to her husband. So if you can sell something, it must have belonged to you. So if the father can sell the girl's earnings, then he must to begin with own her earnings. That is why daughters are different than sons. Fathers cannot get married for their children, for their male children. In fact, male children cannot get married at all until they're 13. It's not possible. Although I think there seem to have been some medieval Jewish communities in which it happened, but it's not halakhically supposed to be possible. In any case, but this is not ordinary earnings. This is not a young lady who like went to work and earned something. This is a girl who got attacked, or maybe she got injured by mistake, but one way or the other, she suffered an injury to her own body, which is certainly hers in a way that her father can't do anything about. And the question is whether he has a right to this money also. So Miyam Rinan, Kevan de Aknile Rahmana Shevach Neorim La'av, Chavala Nami de Avuha Havi. So do we say that since God gave the father her earnings as a child, that God also gave her father her injury? I mean, the payment for her injury. My tama, and why would that be? Because this injury has made her less valuable. So when the father would now go to sell her into marriage, he won't get as much money for her. So presumably some part of this injury is actually, at least temporarily, a loss to the father, because for the time being, until she turns 12, he has the right to sell her and keep the money. As I said, it's definitely a duck. Odilma, or maybe Shevach Neurimhu de Akni Le Rachmana. Maybe God only gave the father the earnings from her childhood, because if the father wants to turn her over, wants to marry her off to a mukeshchin, a man who has boils, it is possible for the father to marry her to such a person. I don't know why, but a man with boils is always the Gemara's favorite example of the most unmarriageable male. I don't, maybe because they in fact actually look awful, maybe it's contagious and like you don't want boils. Like I'm not sure. I'm also not sure whether this is actually boils or whether it's like some sort of pox, in which case maybe we're talking about scars from the blisters rather than the blisters themselves. Like I'm not sure exactly what this physical phenomenon is. Whatever it is, it's the thing that makes men considered like least desirable as spouses. And the father, if he wants to, can choose the least possible desirable man to marry his daughter off to, accept money from the guy for the marriage, and now she's married. She doesn't get a choice. So that must mean that the father owns her, right? Therefore, he owns her earnings, but her injury, since the father is not allowed to just injure his daughter, he may have ownership over her earning power, because that he can sell, but he cannot sell the right to injure her, right? He can't actually punch her in the nose, nor can he sell tickets to other people to punch her in the nose. So he doesn't have ownership over that. So maybe he doesn't get to keep the money for it. So Chavil lo kanile rachman. So then maybe if we're going to go with that version of the logic, then the damage for the injury would not have been given to the father by God. Amarle. So he said back to him, who was this conversation between? Sorry, I got lost. So Rav said back to Rabbi Elazar, Lo zachta Torah la'av ela shevach neurim bilvad. He said, nope, sorry, God only gave the father the earnings from her childhood. He did not give the father the windfall payments for this injury. So now we challenge that. 80 days. Be'eved ivri chayav bekulan chutz min hashevet bizman shu shalom. So here's the challenge. You have a braita that says somebody who injures an eved ivri. No, I'm sorry, this is not a braita. This is our Mishnah. Somebody who injures an eved ivri owes all 5 payments, except for shevet if the eved ivri belongs to him himself. Now, if you injure your own eved ivri, you only owe him 4 payments because the shevet, you're the one suffering because he won't go to work. It was your right to make him work. Now you can't. So I guess you could try to pay yourself, but you're both the injured party and the injuring party, so it evens out. Okay, and that challenges the position that the father doesn't get the money for the injury because the father also has a right to his daughter's earnings. So maybe he should get the shevet because now she can't go to work. So he can't get her salary. So maybe it's, in a sense, the father who's been injured by the girl not being able to go to work. At least that money, there seems to be logic that the father ought to get it. Amar Abaye says, Modeh Rav b'shevet. Rav would concede that the father gets the shevet. Because until the time of Bagrut, which is age 12 and a half, the father owns the girl's earnings. So if you make it impossible for her to earn money, it's the father you owe money to for that. So basically what Abaye said was, well, like, that's a nice challenge, but okay. Rav will just say yes to shevet, and the other 4 payments it doesn't have any effect on. Okay, next challenge, Eitive. Chovel bivno hagadol, yitain lo miyad. So this braita says, somebody who injures their own son, their own adult son, they have to pay them immediately. Now, we don't necessarily want the payments to go to the minor children immediately because they may not be capable of investing them or handling them properly. They may not even be capable of owning them, depending on exactly what we're talking about. But your adult child, the fact that they're your descendant, notwithstanding, is an adult, and you injured them, so you pay them, just like you would with anyone else. Bivnoha katan, but if you injure your own minor son, yaselu skula, you should make an investment with the money, such that put it in a trust fund, effectively, and then when he becomes old enough to handle it, then it'll be his money. But in the meantime, it's not your money, and it is his money, but he shouldn't have access to it because that's not necessarily a good idea. But the same braita says that if you injure your minor daughter, then you're exempt. Sounds like we think that the payment for injury goes to the father. That seems like it would be why he would be exempt, is that it would be one of these cases where you effectively injured yourself, so we don't make you pay. And not only that, but if other people injured the minor daughter, they would have to give the money to her father. The Gemara says, or possibly Abaye says, yeah, we're going to give the same answer here that we gave before, that the payment that we're talking about, that the father gets, or the father doesn't have to pay if he's the one who does the injuring, that's the shevet, because he does have a right to send her to work and get her salary. But he doesn't have a right to anything else here, and all of the other 4 payments are going to go to her personally, presumably because she's a minor, they'll get put into an investment, and that trust fund will be hers when she becomes an adult, but it'll be hers, not her father's. Notice that the Breita does not seem to specify what is supposed to happen if you injure your adult daughter. It's possible that we'll come back to that at some point, but that case seems to be missing here. Okay, that is what I have for you this evening. Are there questions?
Forgive me for digressing, but so when did they ever get rid of this rule that a father can sell his minor daughter?
In the sense that it is a socially reprehensible behavior that causes you to be a horrible person.
Too late, Harvey.
Sort of. In the sense that it doesn't work, no. There was, in fact, a horrible abuse case maybe 35 years ago or so, when I was a teenager, I think, in which a father claimed to have married off his minor daughter, and he claimed that he would not say who the husband was unless his ex-wife made whatever concessions it was that he wanted in the divorce case. I don't know that I knew even at the time what concessions he was asking for, and I certainly don't remember now, but he was effectively holding not just his ex-wife, but also his daughter as an aguna, unless he got what he wanted. It was a very, very famous case. It was written up in international media. It was profoundly evil, and it was an enormous chilul Hashem. So in the sense that it works, it still exists. In the sense that a sane, rational, decent human being would behave that way, no, God forbid. Does that answer your question?
Somewhat.
That is just an awful story.
Well, there was something
It's pretty bad. If I can find a link to a news story, I'll send
There's
it
a
to you.
current case, isn't there? About
Okay.
I forget the name of this group. That it's the group that wanted to move to Iran, because even in Israel they were not welcome because of their because they were doing things like this.
It's possible. There are some weird cults out there.
I forget the name. It was something, something with kadosh in it, but that doesn't narrow it down.
Not much. So I think we have to distinguish between what's considered appropriate behavior in weird cult groups and what's considered normative behavior in the Jewish community as a whole. And as far as I know, there is no part of the Jewish community that's considered to be remotely normal in which this is considered inappropriate behavior. But as I said, that does not mean it does not work, right? It's like holding your wife in aguna, right? It works, it's just evil, and it's not an acceptable behavior. On the other hand, we'd probably be inclined to think that letting your 14-year-old daughter get married using her own volition is also deeply irresponsible at best. Right? I would say most of what happened here is not so much that we fell in love with girls' autonomy, because we don't necessarily give girls the autonomy to do whatever they want with regard to marriage. Right now, we just don't let them get married instead of forcing them to get married. That's not more autonomous. Instead, what we've done is raise the level at which the age at which we think it's a good idea for people to get married to a much, much older age. So I just want to be clear that it's not that we're in love with giving 11-year-olds autonomy over their futures. We don't really believe in that either. We just have a different idea of what it is that we're supposed to be forcing them to do. I like our idea much better, mind you. I'm not criticizing it. I just don't think that it's letting them do whatever they want. And we don't let technically adult, but still too young, whatever that means, people get married either. So I think it's mostly about our having decided that it's not a good idea for people who don't have fully developed frontal cortexes to make permanent decisions about their lives. And also the amount of education you need in order to earn a living now is much greater than it used to be. And that we would like people to be able to earn a living before they set off into adulthood, which is also reasonable. But that's like something that actually changed in the world. That's not just about our opinions. It used to be that a 14-year-old boy could get a job at which he could support a family. By used to be, I mean like before the Industrial Revolution. That's not true anymore. Thank God, because now we have much better jobs. So you have to do some training for them. And we haven't even talked about fathers selling their daughters into slavery yet. Although, to be honest, there's not a huge difference between selling them to slavery and marrying them off. The results and the procedure are both almost exactly the same. Which brings me back to the fight that I had with my teacher those many years ago. He thought they were very different because one was called slavery and the other wasn't. Okay, anything else?
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so
Feel better.
I will see. Thank you. I will see you guys next Monday night.
Thanks, Deborah.
Thanks a lot. Have a good week.
Thank you. You
Thank
too.
you.
Have a good night. Have a good week.
Leaving. Okay, honey.
Yeah, 1950.